Mother's Day is really important to mothers. And in case you haven't caught on by now, let me just repeat that for you, that Mother's Day is a big deal to almost every mother. I mean, even the most phlegmatic, laid-back, understanding mother expects to be honored today with some special attention. And if you stop and think about it, it's easy to understand why. Because this woman sacrifices her body, her time, energy, selfish interests for the family 364 days out of the year. She cleans the house, she prepares the meals, washes the clothes, runs the taxi service, oversees a family, all without much thanks year-round. She often feels like she's taken for granted, and she is. It's expected of her. She tries not to feel sorry for herself, but she does sometimes. And then one day a year is designated Mother's Day. And for days in advance, the family is reminded to find a way to say thanks to Mom just this once. She hears the ads. She sees other mothers getting privileged treatment. And if you don't think anything, she feels even, if you don't do anything, she feels even more unappreciated. She thinks, why bother? They don't even notice. I'm just an unpaid maid. I like the cartoon that shows a mother standing in a living room that's, just a total mess. She's got a crying baby in her arms, and another child is scribbling on the wall. The dog is chasing the cat, and the husband with briefcase in hand has just walked in the front door, and his eyes are bugging out at all the chaos. And the exasperated mother barks, "You always ask me what I do all day. Well, today I didn't do it, and here it is." Mother's Day is a big deal to mothers because it's a chance to say thanks. And if you don't have plans to show special attention to your mother or to your wife, get with it quick, all right? You still got a little bit of time, and she deserves it. The fifth commandment reads to honor your father and your mother. And to honor simply means to value, to respect, to pay tribute to. That responsibility to honor your mother begins when you're a child and continues all the way until the day you die. You aren't exempt from honoring your mother if she's imperfect, or if she gets on your nerves, or if she lives 1,000 miles away. It is this ongoing command for all of us. Jesus Christ set the example for us about how to honor our mother at the various stages of life. And so today, let's consider how Jesus honored Mary on several different occasions, and let's be determined to follow in his steps. The first interaction we read about between Jesus and his mother is in Luke chapter 2, and it is obedience and maturity as a teenager. And so if you got a Bible there with you, flip to Luke chapter 2, verse 52. There's only one story about Jesus as a child in the Bible, but it's an enlightening story. Jesus was 12 years old, and he went with his parents to worship at the temple in Jerusalem for the Passover feast. It was an annual trip of almost 100 miles if they took the normal route around Samaria. And since they usually walked in large groups, it probably took 4 or 5 days. Now, the boy Jesus had always proven responsible, and his parents trusted him. And so when the contingent from Nazareth started home, Mary just assumed Jesus was with his father, and Joseph apparently assumed he was with his mother. But at the end of the first day, when they set up camp, they discovered that Jesus wasn't there. And the longer they searched, the more concerned they were. And panic began to build in Mary's heart. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of people in Jerusalem, and some of them were not very good people. And so, what had happened to Jesus? Well, in her mind, she probably had to picture him kidnapped or injured or at the very least lonely and terrified. I mean, here she had been entrusted by God with raising the Messiah, and she lost him, failed to protect him. The prophet Simeon had predicted that a sword would pierce her soul. Is this what he meant? Years ago in a grocery store in Tennessee where we were living at the time, we lost our little son Joshua, who is probably 3 years old at the time. We were shopping on one aisle. Joshua was right beside us when suddenly he wasn't there. And I immediately went one direction, and Angela, my wife, went the other direction, and my heart started racing. And we called out his name, and we found him probably less than a minute later. But believe me, it was a panicky feeling that seemed to last an eternity. And of course, Joshua didn't even have any clue anything was wrong. He was just having a good time exploring the groceries, you know. Well, Mary and Joseph retraced their steps back to Jerusalem. And it didn't take just a minute to find him. It took 3 days. Luke chapter 2, verses 46 to 52 in the Living Bible reads, 3 days later, they finally discovered him. He was in the temple, sitting among the teachers of the law, discussing deep questions with them and amazing everyone with his understanding and answers. His parents didn't know what to think. Son, his mother said to him, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere. But why did you need to search? He asked. Didn't you realize that I would be here at the temple in my Father's house? But they didn't understand what he meant. It was a mystical, abnormal moment when the deity of Jesus surfaced. And then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. And Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. And so Jesus was obedient to them. He knew he was gifted. He knew he had a special calling even beyond his parents' understanding. He matured physically, socially, spiritually, intellectually. But in his teen years, he was obedient to and respectful of his parents. And I would say, teenagers, you walk in the steps of Jesus and you honor your mother by mature obedience. It's nice to give your mother a card or to take her out to eat later today, but I guarantee you what would mean more to her is for you to be mature enough to obey her basic instructions 365 days a year. When she says that you can play video games for just 1 hour, you don't try and stretch it to 90 minutes. When she says, I want you to turn that music down, you turn it down without complaint. When she says, hey, could you give me a hand setting the table, you jump up immediately and you help out. You don't say, well, yeah, next commercial. If she says, don't drive over the speed limit or make sure you come straight home, you obey what she says. In fact, if you want to be really mature, do the little things without being asked. When you get ready for bed, you throw your dirty clothes in the hamster instead of, or not the hamster, in the hamper instead of on the floor. When you're going to be late, you telephone and you let her know where you are and what you're doing. You get up from the table and you put your dishes away without being asked. When you throw a candy wrapper toward the wastebasket and it misses, you bend down and you pick it up yourself without being told, because if you don't, she'll have to do it. You honor your mother by making her workload easier. The teenage years are usually the most difficult for a mother to endure. It's a period when you're asserting independence and struggling for control. Disobedience is so much easier because you're going places and she's not there. You can lie and she can't tell. Your friends are disrespectful to their parents, and it's the in thing to do. You're growing intellectually and socially, and you think you know best. As a teenager, you are encouraged to question authority and assert your independence. You know, someone has said that adolescence is nature's way of preparing parents to welcome the empty nest. But when you obey, you bring honor to your mother. And more importantly, you're being obedient to God. Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 6, "Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord. For this is the right thing to do. Honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on the earth." But notice there is a promise. If you obey your parents, it will go well with you. And your life will be a lot easier and happier if you obey. It's just common sense. You know, let's say that you're 15 years old and you go out with your friends on a Friday night and your mom says, "I want you home by 11 o'clock at the latest." But you come sneaking in at midnight. She's waiting up for you and she's irate, and you exchange some heated words. "Well, you don't trust me," you bark. You aren't responsible," she says. And then the next morning your mother comes into your room at 9 a.m. and she barks out, "I want you out of this bed right now. You clean up this room. It's a pigsty." But you lay in bed for another half of an hour until she's nagging, and then you spend 45 minutes trying to toss things in drawers and under the bed. She comes in and she yells, "Turn that music down. Are you playing it for the whole neighborhood?" But you barely touch the dial, and there's tension in the house. It's not going well with you. You spend most of the time on the phone complaining to your friends about how your parents abuse you and how they don't understand you. And then about supper time, you say, "Hey, Mom, some of the kids are going out tonight, and they're going to go out to eat tonight, then go to a party, and boy, I'd like to go, and I need about $25. And your mom explodes, "Well, you came in late last night, and you pout around all day, and you don't do what I ask. Your cleaning job in your room is like a 4-year-old's, and now you get all sweet and nice and want to go out again and have the gall to ask me for $25? Do you think I'm absolutely crazy?" Don't you answer that. No. You stay home tonight and you get ready for church tomorrow. And it's not going well with you. I mean, just think how much better your life would go if you would not only be obedient, but mature enough to do the extra little things. You're supposed to be in at 11 on Friday, and so you surprise your mother by coming in at 10. "Why are you home early? Is something wrong, you know?" "No, we were having a great time, but I just wanted to come home early and spend some time watching the news with you, Mom." And the next morning you get out of bed and you start cleaning your room without being asked. And you take down that risque poster that bothers her, and you stream some Barry Manilow music through the smart speaker system. And then you go out and clean the garage. And she thinks she's got the greatest child in the world. And she does. And about supper time you say, "Mom, guess what? Some of the kids are wanting me to go out to eat with them tonight and then go to a party, and I don't have any money, Mom. I sure could use about $25. I'd like to go, but if you'd rather not, that's okay." And she says, "No, I want you to go. Stay as late as you'd like. Here's $50. I don't know how you make your allowance stretch as well as you do." Now, you probably think that's a little bit unrealistic, and it is. But I guarantee you, if you would be mature enough to obey with grace and do the extra little things to help around the house, it would go well with you. That's maturity and wisdom as a teenager. Obedience as a teenager honors your parents and follows in the footsteps of Jesus. And then the next interaction that we read about between Jesus and his mother is found in John chapter 2. Respect and compliance as a young adult. Now, this occurs at the very beginning of his ministry, some 18 years later. And a lot has transpired in the life of Jesus between age 12 and age 30 that we just don't know much about. He grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. He went through the same transitions that all of us do. And apparently his earthly father must have died sometime during his teenage years, because we never read about Joseph again. Mary is always by herself. And so the boy Jesus probably knew what it was to grieve and to be very lonely. And evidently that's why he remained in the carpenter shop until he was 30 years of age. He was providing for his mother and for his younger brothers. The young man Jesus experienced manual labor. He knew what it was to transact business and to have to make ends meet. There's nothing that we experience that's not common to the Son of Man. But at the age of 30, Jesus turned over the carpenter's tools to his younger brothers. He got baptized, and he announced the beginning of his ministry. And a few days later, Jesus and his family were guests at a wedding in Cana. At the reception, which in those days lasted up to as long as a week, well, the host ran short of wine, and that was an embarrassment. And Mary wanted to help her friends out. In John chapter 2, verse 3 reads, "The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, 'They have no more wine.'" Now, that was not an announcement, okay? That was a request. You know, if my mother would have said to me, "David, your niece is going on a short-term mission trip and she doesn't have enough funds," she would have not just been informing me of facts, she would have been making a request for financial assistance. And Jesus' mother said, "Hey, they're short on wine." And she was asking Jesus to help. "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. Leon Morris, in his New International Commentary, says this: "Woman is not as cold in the Greek as it is in the English. He uses it in his last moments as he hangs on the cross and tenderly commends her to the beloved disciple. It's a term of respect or affection, and yet we must bear in mind that it is most unusual to find it when a son addresses his mother. There appears to be no other examples of this cited. It's neither a Hebrew nor a Greek practice. That Jesus calls his mother woman and not mother probably indicates that there is a new relationship between them as he enters his public ministry. And if the form of address is tender, the rest of Jesus' words make it clear that there was something of a barrier between them. Evidently, Mary thought of the intimate relations of the home at Nazareth persisting. But Jesus in his public ministry was not only or primarily the Son of Mary, but the Son of Man, who was to bring the realities of heaven to men. And a new relationship was established. And so Jesus affirmed his independence from his mother. He wasn't bound by her wishes anymore. Her agenda wasn't necessarily his agenda. Jesus said, "My time has not yet come." It wasn't time to fully disclose his identity. And his mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And it's as though Jesus' mother said, "He can do anything, you know. He can do anything. I've got total confidence in him. He'll take care of it. Just do what he says." And then Jesus responds with his first miracle, turning water into wine in response to his mother's request. And there will be times when you feel like your mother is interfering in your adult life. You've completed school, you've left home, you've established your own family, and yet your mother still tries to tell you what to do. You ought to look out for, you ought to be on the lookout for another job, or you eating out again? Or why don't you move back here? It's about time you guys have children. If you wait until you can afford it, you never will. Why did you spend so much for a house? Hey, don't you think she ought to have a sweater on? Don't make her eat that. That happens not just when you're in your 20s, but for some, that continues all through your adult life. Somebody wrote, no matter how old a mother is, she watches over her middle-aged children for signs of improvement. In the sitcom that was so popular a number of years ago, Everybody Loves Raymond, his mother lives right next door and she's always interfering. Raymond bends over backwards to try to keep her happy, and even when she tries to be nice, she offends her daughter-in-law. Well, I can't understand why you're in a bad mood. Your house is a mess. I can understand why you're in a bad mood. Oh, you tried to bake a cake again, honey. Don't get discouraged, dear. Just keep trying. Or, hey, don't let the fact that I'm paying for this entire vacation influence your decisions. Now, that can get on your nerves, and you'll be tempted to explode and create this ongoing tension and hard feelings. And sometimes it's your mother's fault. She's just domineering, and you have to be mature enough to ignore it and go on. And sometimes it's your fault. You just need to establish your independence because you still act like a child around her, and so she treats you like a child. Or you're so afraid of alienating her that you allow her to manipulate you. You blame her, but it's really your lack of courage that's the problem. Maybe you need to have the courage to say, no, Mom, we'll be home every other year at Christmas. Or on alternative years, I'm going to go to the in-laws, Sometimes when your mother seems to be interfering, she's right. Maybe she doesn't approach it as gently as you would like, but she knows what she's talking about. Think about how much more you'll know when that you know now than you did, 20 years ago. Don't you think that she'll gain some more wisdom in another 20 or 30 years? Your mother has that perspective of age and experience, and you need to listen. Singer and songwriter Steve Chapman recently spoke to a men's wild game feed. He and his wife Annie are popular musicians in the Nashville area, specializing in family matters. But Steve says that his mother was a godly Pentecostal woman. She didn't just pray to God, they had a conversation, he said. But when he went off to college, he disregarded her counsel and he got into a little bit of everything, he said. And when he came home for the summer, one week his parents went on vacation and left him alone in the house. And while they were gone, he decided he would get out a pipe and that he had brought home from college and smoke a little bit of marijuana. And he said, looking back, I can't believe that I violated that sacred place, but I did, he said. And he said, when I was finished, I wondered what I should do with the pipe cleaner I'd used. I rolled that thin wire up into a tiny ball. I wrapped it in a napkin. I stuck it inside a soup can and packaged more napkins on top of that and stuck it down all the way in the bottom of the trash can. And he goes on to say that night my parents came home. And the next morning my mother was in my room at about 8 a.m. She sat down on the side of my bed and she said, son, what were you doing with pipe cleaners? He said, Mom, how did you find it? And she said, God told me where it was. Some of you have godly mothers, but you've strayed from the faith that she imparted to you. And she's always looking for some way to pull you back into living right. One of the most selfish, hurtful things that you can do is to ridicule that faith. Belittle her counsel. You not only blaspheme God, but you also wound the heart of your mother. And if you have a godly mother who refuses to quit on you, be grateful. It may be her prayers that have spared you from God's wrath. It may be her reminders that will bring you back to God's will and save you for eternity. maybe you need to listen to her before it's too late. Jesus turned water into wine to help the host, but also to be respectful of his mother's desires, even though she may have been imposing a little bit. And we would be wise to follow in his steps. And then turn in your Bible to the Gospel of Mark, the 3rd chapter, where we read of another interaction between Jesus and his mother. Patience and tolerance when your mother is wrong. Here in this chapter, we read of an incident between Jesus and his mother where she was completely wrong about him. Mark chapter 3, verse 20 reads, "One time Jesus entered a house, and the crowds began to gather again. Soon he and his disciples couldn't even find time to eat. When his family heard what was happening, they tried to take him away. 'He's out of his mind,' they said." Jesus' popularity was beginning to snowball. Rumors had circulated that he was the Messiah, and everyone was buzzing about Jesus. But when his family heard about what was taking place, they were disturbed. We read a little later that Jesus' younger brothers didn't believe that he was the Messiah until after he had risen from the dead. And you know, it's sometimes hard for a family or for friends to accept that someone close to them is extra special. Some of you possibly babysat for men or women when they were just little children who hold positions of responsibility today. And you have a hard time seeing them in the role in which they now play. Billy Bob, man, I wiped his snotty nose when he was 6 years old. Or he's running for governor. I mean, I was in high school with him, and he didn't even win the race for student council president. He's the new principal at that school. He's my cousin. Man, he wasn't a great student at all. Remember when Jesus first went to his hometown? He began teaching the people in the synagogue, and the people were amazed. He says, where does he get this wisdom and the power to do miracles? Then they scoffed. He's just the carpenter's son. And we know Mary, his mother, and his brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. I mean, all his sisters live right here among us. Where did he learn all these things? And they were offended and refused to believe him. Then Jesus told them, a prophet is honored everywhere except in his own hometown and among his own family. I mean, Jesus' own brothers were offended by the influence that he was the Messiah, or his inference that he was the Messiah. His brothers thought, you know, he's a good guy, but he's just a man like us. And so they came to take charge of him because they thought he must be out of his mind. The Message paraphrases it this way: they suspected he was getting carried away with himself. And they brought Mary with them. They must have persuaded her that Jesus' life was endangered because she went along with their efforts to rescue him. And maybe in her mind she was thinking, he's not taking time to rest or eat anymore. He needs to come home for a break and to get a good meal. Mark chapter 3 verse 31 says, then Jesus' mother and brothers came to see him. And they stood outside and sent word for him to come out and talk with them. There was a crowd sitting around Jesus, and someone said, your mother and your brothers are outside asking for you. And Jesus replied, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Anyone who does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. Now, Jesus could have publicly humiliated his mother. Wait just a minute, woman. How did you get pregnant out of wedlock? I mean, didn't you say an angel visited you? How many times did you whisper in my ear when I was growing up that I was the chosen of God? How can you let me down like this? But instead, he just calmly stood his ground and affirmed those who shared his convictions and his goals. He affirmed that those who shared his convictions and his goals were his closest relatives now. And there will be times when, your mother is wrong. When we're young, we idolize our parents and we think they're perfect. But then there comes that day when we discover that our parents actually have feet of clay. They're not perfect parents, perfect mates, or even perfect Christians. Somebody has said, the 4 people you have the most difficulty forgiving are your mother, your father, yourself, and God. I mean, you'll forgive strangers quicker than those closest to you because you're so hurt that they haven't met your unrealistic expectations. And often we go to the opposite extreme in the teen years and we see them as total bunglers and ridicule or resent them. But maturity is when you forgive your parents for their fallibility, but you still appreciate the invaluable contribution they've made to your life. Don't be bitter against her all your life and blame all your problems on your mother. Welcome to the real world, Forgive her. But don't allow her ongoing erroneous influence to divert you from walking in obedience to God. There may be times when you have to admit she's just wrong. Maybe she doesn't share your spiritual values and she criticizes you for being, baptized or changing churches or going on a mission trip or the fact that you stay with your spouse. She thinks you're out of your mind, But Jesus sets a positive example for how we should respond in that kind of circumstance. Don't let your mother's wrong opinions prevent you from doing what is right. But be tolerant, patient as possible, knowing that in the end, truth prevails. Acts chapter 1, verse 14 reports that following Jesus' death and resurrection, they all met together and were constantly united in prayer, along with Mary, the mother of Jesus, several other women, and the brothers of Jesus. Mary witnessed the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. She was there at the beginning of the early church. Her claims of a virgin birth and the promise from an angel were now proven to be true. She had to wait 33 years, but she had been vindicated. But when she was wrong, Jesus had been understanding and respectful, and we would do well to follow in his steps. And then I want you to turn to one final passage with me this morning, John chapter 19, verses 25 to 27. Here Jesus shows that another way to honor your mother is to make sure that she has care and provision when she's in need. John 19, 25. Standing near the cross were Jesus' mother. And she must have been in her early 50s at this time, not all that aged, but living alone as a widow. When Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her, "Dear woman, here is your son." And he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. At the foot of the cross were the 2 people that Jesus loved the most, his mother and John, who we call the beloved disciple. Jesus made provision for his mother to be cared for after he died. For some reason, his brothers and sisters apparently weren't capable of taking care of Mary. Were their homes too small? Were their children too numerous? Their incomes too meager? We don't know. But John had the capability of caring for her and shared her spiritual faith. And so Jesus entrusted to John the responsibility of caring for his mother after he was gone. Part of honoring your mother is to make sure that she is provided for when she can't take care of herself. Children have an obligation to honor their parents as they grow older. And that might mean seeing that their needs are met in case you should die before they do, as Jesus did. It might mean pitching in with the resources so your parents can live their final years in dignity. It might mean showing tender love and care even when their health or their mental faculties begin to fail. Dave Kennedy is a much respected preacher in our brotherhood. His mother has Alzheimer's and often doesn't even recognize him. He debated just recently, just this last year, about buying his mother a Mother's Day card. She can't read anymore. She won't remember it if he does. She won't know that he even gave it to her. But Dave said, I'll know. She's my mom, and she deserves my love and respect. Leviticus 19:32 says, stand up in the presence of the elderly and show respect for the aged. Fear your God. I am the Lord. Honor your mother today. Believe me, she deserves it for the sacrifices that she made for you. Honor her with mature obedience through the difficult teenage years. Then it will go well with you. And when you become an adult, honor her by asserting your independence, but respectfully receiving her ideas, even when it seems she's interfering. And if your mother doesn't understand your spiritual commitment and thinks you're out of your mind, instead of exploding in your own defense, honor her by standing firm in your convictions and lovingly show her the truth in time. Honor her by making certain that her needs are taken care of when she can't provide for herself, even if you're not around. And in the end, you honor your mother the most by honoring Jesus Christ in your own life. You know, most of us are pretty familiar with the story of Todd Beamer by now. On September 11th, 2001, he was aboard Flight 93 when it was hijacked by those terrorists. Todd and several others charged the cockpit, and they forced the plane to crash in Pennsylvania in a field, thereby preventing an attack somewhere along Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And before saying those now famous words, "Let's roll," and attacking the terrorists, Todd Beamer attempted to call his wife to say goodbye. And when he couldn't reach her, he called a GTE airphone operator who later relayed his conversation in words of farewell to Lisa, his wife, with whom he had graduated from Wheaton College just a few years before. The media reported the heart-rending account of how Todd asked the operator to pray the Lord's Prayer with him. Ironically, the home Bible study that Todd and Lisa belonged to were in the process of studying through the Lord's Prayer at the time. But Todd's first exposure to the Lord's Prayer was not in that class, but at his mother's knee. The parents took the kids to church every Sunday, read the Bible around the breakfast table, and imparted godly values to their children. Just recently, David and Peggy Beamer, Todd's parents, spoke on a Tuesday evening to an auditorium full of people at the Napoleon High School in Napoleon, Ohio. As Peggy Beamer talked, you could tell that she was, fighting back tears while speaking of her son's death. But her pride in her son was undeniable. I mean, you could just tell she knew he had given his life for his country and, even more importantly, had honored his Lord in doing so. She knew where he was, and she was confident she would see him again one day soon. John writes in 3 John chapter 1, verse 4, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. And if you had or still have a godly mother, the greatest way you can honor her is to be a Christian. Plan to spend eternity with her and with Christ. Maybe this day is the time for you to return to the truth you were taught as a child and walk in obedience to Christ. Or maybe today is the day for you to begin your walk with Christ by accepting Him as Lord and Savior. Whatever your decision may be today, we would welcome you and we would encourage you to contact us and to share that with us so that we can rejoice with you and so that we can walk with you in whatever the next steps may be.